Power has a language all its own. It's spoken in quiet rooms, under bright lights, and through carefully calibrated smiles. It's a language of data, alliances, and predictable applause. But what happens when someone stands up and speaks a truth that language was never designed to hear? What happens when the script is torn apart, live on the world stage? This is a story about that moment, a confrontation that redefined the meaning of help and control. If you believe in the power of unfiltered truth, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The air in the Manhattan Conference Hall was heavy with manufactured importance. It was a sterile environment, polished to a high sheen, where even the light seemed to have been pre-approved by a committee. Flags stood like silent soldiers in perfect formation. The introductions were smooth, the handshakes firm, the schedule meticulously planned. It all screamed diplomacy, but beneath the gloss lay something raw, an inconvenient reality waiting to erupt. At the center of this curated world was Jessica Tarve. Flanked by her team and the ever-present camera crews, she had just concluded her opening remarks. She was the perfect instrument of Western policy, her performance a masterclass in controlled persuasion. Her words, woven with data, alliances, and the favorite Western phrase, democracy promotion, flowed with a rehearsed, eloquent precision. "America doesn't interfere," she said, her smile perfectly calibrated for both the cameras and the room. "We support voices. We build institutions. We bring democracy." The applause came exactly on cue, polite, predictable, and utterly devoid of passion. It was the sound of agreement, not conviction. But before it could fade naturally, a different kind of presence cut through the room like a cold wind. Ibrahim Traoré stood. He did not move with the urgency of a man seeking attention, nor the defensiveness of one expecting a fight. He moved with the profound calm of someone who had seen too much to be impressed by speeches. No tie, no script, and no pre-approved talking points. Just presence. He looked directly at Jessica, his gaze holding hers for a moment before sweeping across the audience. "You say you bring democracy," he began, his voice low but carrying a weight that demanded silence. The polite clapping faltered and died. "But what arrives with you is surveillance, conditions, and armed guards." The room stiffened. This was not on the agenda. Traoré walked forward, not to the microphone, but to the front podium where Jessica had just spoken. He gently placed a single worn photograph onto its polished surface. The image was clear: children in Burkina Faso waving broken smartphones instead of flags. "These are the tools you give us, not to vote, to be watched." The first thread of the carefully woven narrative had just been pulled. The air, once thick with diplomatic platitudes, was now charged with a tension that was real, unscripted, and utterly captivating. The carefully managed event was over. Something else had just begun. For a moment, Jessica Tarve was caught in the blast radius of a truth she hadn't prepared for. Her expression, usually a carefully managed mask of diplomatic poise, flickered between disbelief and irritation. The photograph on the podium was an accusation, a piece of unscripted reality dropped into her world of talking points and policy papers. She leaned toward her microphone, her training kicking in, searching for a way to reclaim the narrative. This was her arena, and she would not cede it to a single disruptive voice. "Are you accusing the United States of imperialism, Mr. Traoré?" she asked, her voice sharp, designed to frame him as an extremist. It was a classic debater's tactic: force your opponent to defend a loaded term. He didn't blink. He didn't take the bait. "I'm saying your help always seems to come with a leash, and someone is always holding the other end." Gasps rippled through the audience, not from the panelists, but from the students, the journalists, the junior diplomats in the back. They had come for a performance and were suddenly witnessing a confrontation. Jessica's smile, once a weapon of soft power, faltered. She tried again, falling back on the foundational argument of her entire career. "Democracy isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternatives." Traoré took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. "Your version of democracy always seems to make you the alternative." Silence. Not an empty silence, but a loaded one, thick with the weight of what had just been said. The event was no longer about partnerships. It was about power. The moderators, sensing the complete loss of control, scrambled to intervene, directing a harmless question about regional cooperation to another panelist. But no one was listening anymore. The war had moved beyond the stage. Jessica tried to steer the conversation back during the next session, listing the schools funded, the healthcare provided. Traoré cut through the noise with surgical precision. "You fund obedience," he stated, not as an opinion, but as a fact. "And when that fails, you fund opposition." He then turned to the audience, making them participants in the trial. Ask yourselves, how many leaders welcomed U.S. support and fell when they stopped taking orders? That night, the clips began to spread. Jessica's team, working furiously behind the scenes, tried to frame Traoré as emotional, passionate, but misguided. But the strategy backfired. In an interview, Jessica said, "Passion without policy is just noise." The comment went viral, but the replies were brutal. "He's lived what you study," one read. "Policy without pain is the real noise." Jessica was losing the narrative, not because she lacked facts, but because he possessed a truth that facts alone could not refute. An internal diplomatic email was leaked, describing Traoré as a dangerous influence. The label was meant to be a cage, but he turned it into a platform, walking into his next event and saying, "Maybe it's just dangerous to the comfort of those in power." The word, meant to discredit him, had become his shield. The war of words had begun, and the man with no script was winning. The war of words moved from the bright lights of the stage to the suffocating quiet of a closed-door strategy session. This was Jessica's turf. No cameras, no unpredictable audience, just a polished mahogany table and the key players, diplomats, analysts, and the man who had single-handedly derailed their summit. Here, the currency was not charisma, but data, and Jessica had come prepared to make it rain. She pulled up a chart, the crisp lines and bold numbers filling a large screen. Burkina Faso receives over $200 million annually in U.S. assistance, she began, her voice regaining its earlier, unshakable confidence. Schools, medical aid, infrastructure. Is that control, Mr. Traoré? It was a direct challenge, an attempt to bury his narrative under an avalanche of irrefutable facts. The room was with her. This was a language they understood. Traoré looked at the chart, then at the faces around the table, men and women who saw the world in spreadsheets. He didn't dispute a single number. Instead, he began to dismantle the story they told. "Who builds the schools?" he asked, his voice calm, inquisitive. An aide next to Jessica shuffled his papers. "American contractors, primarily, for quality assurance." "And who supplies the medicine?" Traoré continued. "Western pharmaceutical companies," Jessica answered, with a hint of impatience in her tone. "They meet international standards." "And who?" Traoré said, letting the question hang in the air. "Who chooses what gets built and where?" No one answered. The silence was an admission. "You call it aid," Traoré continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, holding each person accountable. "We call it outsourced sovereignty." Jessica interjected sharply, seeing her advantage slip away. "But the outcomes, aren't they good for your people? Are you saying a new hospital is a bad thing?" Traoré leaned in, the quiet intensity of his posture drawing all focus. "It is not just what is given, Miss Tarve," he said, his voice dropping slightly, forcing them to listen even more closely. "It is what is taken in return." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle before he spoke them. The voice, the choice, the right to refuse. A heavy, profound silence followed. It was no longer a debate about policy. It was a reckoning with the very nature of power. In that moment, everyone in the room understood that he wasn't rejecting help. He was rejecting dependence, disguised as generosity. And for the first time in her career, Jessica Tarve was left with no counter-argument that wouldn't immediately prove him right. The numbers on the screen still glowed, but their meaning had been irrevocably broken. The final panel was an exercise in damage control, a televised performance designed to smooth over the cracks that had been violently exposed. The stage was sleeker, the lighting softer, the tone meant to be polished and reassuring. This was the part of the summit built for optics, for the clips and headlines that would shape the official memory of the event. Beneath a glowing banner proclaiming global progress through partnership, Jessica was back in full command, seated center stage. She opened with renewed confidence, her voice a soothing balm of practiced diplomacy. "Democracy is not just an idea," she explained, looking warmly into the camera. "It's a structure, and structures require stability, funding, and collaboration." The audience, carefully selected for this final session, clapped as the cameras panned across their faces. It was a perfect scene of consensus. Then it was Traoré's turn. He didn't match her smile. He didn't reach for the language of diplomacy. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a faded, creased document, a treaty signed decades ago between his country and a Western power. The physical object, old and worn, was a stark intrusion into the sleek, modern stage. "This is what partnership looked like to my grandfather," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. He held it up for the cameras to see. "You took our gold. You gave us rules." Jessica shifted slightly in her seat, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "That was then, Mr. Traoré. We've evolved." Traoré nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. "Yes, you have," he agreed, the words landing with a chilling weight. "From chains to contracts, from occupation to influence." He let the parallel hang in the air. "The vocabulary changed, the power didn't." A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Jessica responded smoothly, a practiced pivot. "Influence can be positive. Look at the growing number of African voices in global forums." "And who decides which voices are amplified?" Traoré cut in, his timing impeccable. "Who funds the platforms? Who edits the message?" The air thickened. Jessica, cornered, tried one last gambit. "Would you prefer isolation, then? Silence? The world ignoring you altogether?" Traoré answered instantly, without a flicker of hesitation. "I'd prefer a voice that doesn't need permission to be heard." The audience grew utterly still. Somewhere between the debate prep and the bright lights, a simple, undeniable truth had broken through. Freedom isn't about how many microphones you're given, it's about whether you're allowed to speak when it's inconvenient. And Jessica knew, just for a moment, as her practiced smile felt like a lead weight on her face, that her entire arsenal of policy and rhetoric couldn't cover that. The clip went viral within hours. The echo of that single sentence had become louder than the entire summit. The summit ended, but the conversation had just begun. The videos continued to spread, subtitled in dozens of languages. Their raw honesty finding a home in classrooms, activist circles, and even the quiet, insulated conversations inside policy think tanks. The official narrative was dead. Something more real had taken its place. Jessica returned to Washington, D.C. Her resume remained impressive, her position secure, her confidence a shield she wore like armor. But something fundamental had shifted, and she knew it. Standing before a Senate committee to debrief on the summit's outcomes, the air was thick with unspoken questions. One senator, a veteran of countless such hearings, leaned into his microphone. "You were challenged pretty hard out there, Miss Tarv. Did he get under your skin?" Jessica paused, the polished surface of her composure cracking just for a second. She looked past the senator, seeing the faces from the summit in her mind. "He got under all our assumptions," she answered, the admission costing her more than anyone in the room could know. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré walked alone through a village that had never appeared in any donor report. There were no cameras this time, no suits, no microphones. There was just him and the people he had never stopped speaking for.
An elder, his face a roadmap of his country's history, approached him. "You shook them," the old man said, a small smile touching his lips. Traoré shook his head gently. "No," he replied, "I reminded them." "Reminded them of what?" "That freedom isn't granted by treaties," Traoré said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's claimed by truth." Back in the United States, students began quoting him in their papers. Podcasters dissected his lines. Even skeptical journalists, trained to see the world through a lens of cynical pragmatism, had to admit it. He didn't ask for power. He forced us to re-examine ours. Jessica was invited to a televised follow-up, a final attempt to reclaim the story. The host asked her, "What would you say to Mr. Traoré now if he were watching?" She looked directly into the camera, her voice even. "I'd say, next time I'll listen more." But across the ocean, Traoré wasn't watching. He didn't need to. While others chased attention, he had something far more powerful, a message that outlasted the microphone. And in every quiet place where someone once felt small, they now whispered the words Jessica would never forget. "You bring control, but we bring the end of it." The battle between narrative and reality is never over. The most powerful truths are often spoken without permission. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that a single voice can challenge an empire of assumptions, then help us amplify it. Like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to continue exploring the stories that matter, make sure you subscribe. The conversation is just getting started.